I never thought much about the sound of applause until the day I won my first powerlifting competition. I'd been training for 8 months, pushing my body to limits I didn't know existed, and when I finally locked out that deadlift at regionals, the entire gym erupted. But there was one sound that cut through everything else. One person clapping louder, harder, more enthusiastically than anyone in that crowd. It was Mason, my gym partner, the guy I'd been trying not to fall in love with for the past 6 months. Let me back up a bit. My name is Cameron, I'm 26, and up until about a year ago, I thought I had my life pretty figured out. I worked as a software developer, spent my evenings gaming or watching Netflix, and had the typical roster of failed Tinder dates that never went anywhere. I wasn't unhappy exactly, just sort of existing in this comfortable grey zone where nothing really mattered that much. Then my doctor told me my cholesterol was creeping up and maybe I should consider actually moving my body occasionally. So I joined a gym. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd walk in, stare at the equipment like it was alien technology, do some half-hearted curls and leave feeling like I'd wasted $40 on a monthly membership. I was about ready to quit when Mason approached me one Tuesday evening. He was spotting someone on the bench press, and when they finished, he walked over to where I was struggling with the cable machine, clearly using it wrong. "Hey man," he said, and I remember thinking his voice was warm, friendly in a way that didn't feel forced. "You training for anything specific or just trying to stay active?" He had dark hair that was always slightly messy, like he'd just run his hands through it, and these grey-green eyes that seemed genuinely interested in my answer. I told him the truth, that I had no clue what I was doing and was mostly there because my doctor scared me. He laughed, not at me but with this understanding that made me relax immediately. He said he'd been there too, that everyone starts somewhere, and if I wanted he could show me some basics. That's how it started, just a guy being nice to another guy at the gym. We started training together 3 times a week. Mason taught me proper form, how to breathe during lifts, the difference between training for strength versus hypertrophy. He was patient in a way I wasn't used to, never making me feel stupid for asking questions, and somewhere between learning to squat correctly and figuring out my macros, we became friends. Real friends, the kind who text each other dumb memes at 2 a.m. and grab coffee after workouts. Mason was a physical therapist, which explained why he was so good at explaining movement patterns and preventing injury. He was 28, had a dog named Rookie, who he was obsessed with, and could quote every line from The Princess Bride. He was also straight, or at least I assumed he was, because he occasionally mentioned going on dates with women, though never anything that seemed to stick. I didn't think I was attracted to men. I mean, I'd had those moments in college, appreciating another guy's appearance in a way that felt different from just acknowledging someone was objectively good looking, but I'd always filed it away as nothing, just stray thoughts everyone probably had. I dated women exclusively, had a girlfriend for 2 years in my early 20s. It never occurred to me that maybe I was looking in the wrong direction. Then one day, about 3 months into training with Mason, something shifted. We were doing deadlifts, and he was standing beside me, watching my form. I pulled the weight up, and when I set it down, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Dude, that was perfect, your hip hinge is finally clicking." And I felt this jolt go through me that had nothing to do with the exercise. His hand was warm through my shirt, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was standing, the smell of his deodorant mixed with sweat, the way his eyes lit up when he was excited about something. I stepped back quickly, mumbled thanks, and suggested we move on to the next exercise. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him, the way he smiled when he was proud of my progress, how he'd sometimes grab my arm to adjust my position, and I'd feel my skin burn where he touched me. The fact that I looked forward to our training sessions more than anything else in my week. Oh no, I thought. Oh no, no, no. This isn't happening. But it was happening. Once I acknowledged it, I couldn't unknow it. I started noticing everything. The way Mason would bite his lower lip when he was concentrating. How he'd run his hand through his hair when he was thinking. The sound of his laugh, which was loud and completely unself-conscious. I noticed that he always remembered little details I mentioned, like when I said I was stressed about a work deadline, he'd check in days later to ask how it went. I noticed that sometimes, when we were sitting on the bench between sets, our knees would touch, and he never moved away. I tried to convince myself it was just admiration, that thing where you want to be someone so much that you confuse it with wanting them. but that didn't explain why my heart would speed up when his name appeared on my phone. It didn't explain why I started caring about what I wore to the gym, or why I felt jealous when I saw him talking and laughing with other people. I didn't know what to do with these feelings. I'd never told anyone I might not be entirely straight, because I'd never had to. It felt too big and too complicated to examine. So I did what I do best. I avoided dealing with it. I showed up to our sessions, tried to act normal, and pretended my entire world hadn't tilted on its axis. Mason suggested I sign up for a powerlifting competition. He said I'd gotten strong enough that it would be a good goal to work toward, something concrete to structure my training. The competition was 4 months away, which meant we'd need to really dial in my program. I agreed, partly because it sounded exciting, but mostly because it meant more time with him. Those 4 months were the best and worst of my life. Best because I was getting stronger, more confident, and spending hours every week with someone who made me genuinely happy. Worst because I was falling for him harder every single day, and I had no idea if he could ever feel the same way. I didn't even know if he liked men, and I was terrified that if I said anything I'd lose him completely. Training intensified. We'd meet 4 times a week now, focusing on my 3 main lifts: squat, bench press, and deadlift. Mason programmed everything, tracking my progress, adjusting weights, making sure I was recovering properly. He was invested in my success in a way that made my chest ache. After workouts, we'd go to this diner near the gym and eat massive breakfast, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his family, his sister who was getting married in the fall, his mum who called him every Sunday. I told him about my work frustrations, my complicated relationship with my dad, my secret love of trashy reality TV. There were moments when I thought, maybe, possibly, he felt something too. Like the time we were stretching after a heavy squat session, and he helped me with a hip flexor stretch, his hands on my leg, and when I looked up, he was staring at me with this expression I couldn't read. Or the Saturday morning he texted me asking if I wanted to come meet Rookie, and I spent 3 hours at his apartment watching him play with his dog, feeling so content I could have stayed forever. When I left, he hugged me goodbye, and I swear he held on just a second longer than necessary. But then he'd mention some woman he'd gone out with, or I'd see him at the gym talking to one of the female trainers with that easy flirtation, and I'd remind myself I was probably imagining things. Straight guys could be affectionate with their friends. That didn't mean anything. 2 weeks before the competition, I had a minor panic attack. We were loading plates for a heavy deadlift attempt, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. The weight felt impossible, the competition felt impossible, and the idea of Mason watching me fail felt unbearable. I sat down on the floor, head between my knees, trying to calm down. Mason sat down next to me without a word. He didn't tell me to breathe or that everything would be okay. He just sat there, his shoulder touching mine, waiting. After a few minutes, I managed to say, "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough?" He turned to look at me, and his voice was so steady, so certain. "Cameron, I've watched you add 150 pounds to your deadlift in 8 months. I've seen you show up on days when you were exhausted, when you were sore, when you clearly didn't want to be here, and you did the work anyway. You're one of the strongest people I know, and I'm not just talking about the weight you can lift." Something in the way he said it, the intensity in his eyes, made me think he was talking about something beyond powerlifting, but I was too scared to ask what he meant. I just nodded and said, "Thanks for believing in me." He smiled and said, "Always," and we finished the session. Competition day arrived faster than I was ready for. I barely slept the night before, running through my attempts over and over in my head. Mason picked me up at 6 in the morning, bringing coffee and bagels. He seemed more nervous than I was, which was oddly comforting. On the drive to the venue, he kept giving me last-minute tips, reminding me to trust my training, to stay present with each lift. The competition venue was overwhelming. So many people, so much noise, racks, and platforms everywhere. I weighed in, got my rack height set, and tried not to throw up from nerves. Mason stayed with me the entire time, helping me warm up, making sure I ate and stayed hydrated. Between flights, when I had hours to wait, we sat in the stands and he distracted me with stupid stories from his own first competition years ago. When it was finally time for my first squat attempt, my hands were shaking. Mason walked me to the warm-up area, and before I went out to the platform, he grabbed both my shoulders and looked me straight in the eye. "You've got this," he said. "I've seen you hit this weight a dozen times. Just one more rep. I'll be right there watching. And even though there would be hundreds of people watching, knowing he was there made it feel manageable. I hit all 3 of my squat attempts. The third one was a grinder, my legs shaking as I drove up out of the hole, but I locked it out. When I racked the weight, I could hear Mason screaming my name from the crowd. Bench press went well too, 9 for 9 so far. But deadlift was my best lift, the one I was hoping to really shine on. My first 2 deadlift attempts felt smooth, but for my third attempt, Mason suggested I go for a weight that would put me in the first place in my weight class. It was ambitious, 20 pounds more than I'd ever pulled in training. I was terrified. But he said, "You're stronger today than you've ever been, and I trust you," and somehow that was enough. I walked up to the bar and the weight looked impossible. 605 pounds. I could hear the announcer say my name, the attempt, and then everything went quiet in my head. I bent down, gripped the bar, took a deep breath. I thought about every single training session that had led to this moment. Every early morning, every rep that felt too hard, every time Mason had encouraged me to keep going. I pulled. The bar came off the ground, slow, so slow. My grip was screaming, my back was on fire. Everything in me wanted to drop it. But I kept pulling, inch by inch, until I was standing upright, knees locked, shoulders back. The judge's light turned white. Good lift. The crowd exploded. I dropped the bar and just stood there, stunned that I'd actually done it. And that's when I heard it. Through all the noise, all the cheering, I heard Mason. He was clapping so hard, so loud, screaming my name like I'd just won the Olympics. I looked into the crowd and found him, standing up, hands above his head, clapping with everything he had, and the look on his face was pure joy. Pride. Something else I was afraid to name. I won my weight class, first place, first competition. They called me up to the platform for awards, put a medal around my neck, and I felt like I was floating. But all I could think about was getting back to Mason, sharing this moment with him. After the awards ceremony, after I'd taken the required photos and thanked the organisers, I found Mason waiting by the exit. The moment he saw me, he closed the distance between us and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you," he said into my ear, and his voice cracked a little. "You were incredible." I hugged him back and I didn't want to let go. I didn't care that we were in public, that people might see that I was sweaty and exhausted. I just wanted to stay in this moment where everything felt perfect and possible. We finally pulled apart, and he was grinning at me, eyes bright. "So, champion, how do you want to celebrate?" I said the first thing that came to mind. "Just hang out with you, honestly. I can't imagine being anywhere else right now." Something flickered across his face, an expression I'd seen before but never let myself interpret. He said, "Yeah, me too," and there was weight to those words. We ended up back at his apartment. He said Rookie would be excited to see me, and I never needed much excuse to go there anyway. We ordered pizza, drank beer, and I finally crashed from the adrenaline high. I was sitting on his couch, medal still around my neck because I'd forgotten to take it off, and Mason was sitting next to me, closer than he needed to be. "Can I tell you something?" he said suddenly, and his voice was different, nervous in a way I'd never heard. I felt my heart start to race. Yeah, of course, anything. He took a breath, looked down at his hands. "When you were up there today, pulling that last deadlift, I realised something. I've been trying to ignore it for months, telling myself I was imagining it or that it was just because we'd become such good friends. But watching you today, seeing you accomplish something you worked so hard for, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move." He continued, "I think I have feelings for you, Cameron, like real feelings, more than friends' feelings, and I know you might not feel the same way, and if you don't, we can forget I said anything and just go back to how things were." But I had to tell you because keeping it inside was killing me. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I almost laughed. "You think you're the only one who's been losing their mind for months?" I said. "Mason, I've been falling for you since probably that first day you corrected my cable machine form. I just thought you were straight and I was terrified to say anything because I couldn't stand the idea of losing you." He looked up at me, eyes wide. "Wait, seriously? You have feelings for me too?" I nodded, and suddenly we were both laughing. This giddy, disbelieving laughter at how stupid we'd both been. "I can't believe we've been doing this dance for months," he said. "I thought I was going crazy, reading into every little interaction." "You weren't reading into it," I said. "Every time you touched me, I felt like I was on fire. Every time you texted me, my whole day got better. I've never felt this way about anyone, and it scared the hell out of me." He reached over and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. His palm was warm and slightly rough from lifting, and the simple contact sent electricity up my arm. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "I've dated women my whole life because it seemed like what I was supposed to do, but none of those relationships ever felt right, and I couldn't figure out why. Then I met you, and suddenly everything made sense. I'd never connected with anyone the way I connected with you. We sat there holding hands, and it felt like the world had rearranged itself into something that finally made sense. So what now?" I asked. He smiled, that smile I'd been memorizing for months. "Now I really want to kiss you, if that's okay." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to change my mind, but I met him halfway. Kissing Mason felt like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been searching for. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of us learning this new language. But then his hand came up to cut my jaw, and I grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made my head spin. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, and he pressed his forehead against mine. "That was worth the wait," he murmured, and I laughed breathlessly. Yeah, it really was. We spent the rest of the night on his couch, talking about everything we'd been holding back. He told me about the moment he realized he was attracted to me, which was apparently during a squat session when I'd made some stupid joke and he'd thought, "Oh no, I want to kiss him." I told him about my crisis over the shoulder touch, how I'd spent weeks trying to convince myself I was making something out of nothing. We talked about what this meant, how we wanted to navigate this new territory. Neither of us had been in a relationship with a man before, but we both knew we wanted to try, with each other. That was 8 months ago. We're together now, officially, and it's the best relationship I've ever had. We still train together, though now our post-workout meals often turn into dates. We told our families, which went better than either of us expected. My mum cried happy tears and said she just wanted me to be happy, and she could see that Mason made me happy. His sister said she'd had a feeling about us from the way he talked about me and that she was thrilled. Last month, I competed again, and I broke my own record. And yes, Mason was there in the crowd, clapping louder than anyone, cheering like his life depended on it. But this time, when I came off the platform, I got to kiss him in celebration, right there in front of everyone. Some people stared, but I didn't care. I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. The gym, which used to be this intimidating place I avoided, became the setting for the most important relationship of my life. All because one guy was kind enough to help a stranger with the cable machine. All because I was brave enough eventually to admit what I was feeling. All because sometimes the person you're supposed to be with has been standing right next to you, spotting your lifts and believing in you, waiting for you to realize what was there all along. I learned a lot from powerlifting. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that consistency matters more than motivation, that progress isn't always linear. But the most important thing I learned had nothing to do with weight on a bar. I learned that love can show up in unexpected places, in unexpected forms, with unexpected people. I learned that sometimes the scariest thing is also the most worthwhile thing, and I learned that the sound of someone clapping for you, really clapping for you with their whole heart, is the most beautiful sound in the world when it comes from the person you love. Mason and I are planning to move in together next spring. We're looking at apartments with enough space for a home gym because of course we are. Rookie will come too, obviously. We're talking about the future in a way that feels real and possible and exciting. I never imagined my life would look like this, but I can't imagine it any other way now. Sometimes I think about that version of me from a year and a half ago, the guy who was just existing, going through the motions, not really living. I wish I could tell him that everything is about to change, that he's about to meet someone who will see him, really see him, and make him want to be better. That he's about to discover parts of himself he didn't know existed. That he's going to fall in love, really truly deeply in love, and it's going to be scary and wonderful and absolutely worth it. But mostly, I'm just grateful. Grateful for bad cholesterol that made me join a gym. Grateful for Mason's kindness to a stranger. Grateful for every training session, every conversation, every moment that built the foundation of what we have now. Grateful that I found the courage to be honest about my feelings, even when I was terrified. And grateful that when I finally took the leap, Mason was there to catch me, because he'd been waiting to jump too. So yeah, my gym partner clapped louder than anyone when I won. But that's not really the story. The story is that he saw me, believed in me, and loved me before I even knew that's what I needed. And now we get to build a life together, one rep at a time, spotting each other through the heavy lifts and celebrating every victory no matter how small. That's the real win. Everything else is just weight on a bar.